Japan's apparent reluctance to eliminate quotas on beef and citrus imports were the main topics of a news conference recently in the nation's capital. Agriculture Secretary Richard Ling noted that the price of American beef was substantially higher than Japanese beef due to Japan's import tariffs.
Strip sirloin steak, $4.99 a pound, 143 yen per 100 grams. In Tokyo, the same day, $20.50 per pound, $20.56 per pound, 590 yen for 100 grams. These are a graphic example of the kind of effects that you get from having quotas that are smaller than the demand of the public will really tolerate. It seems to us that the Japanese consumer should have an opportunity to choose and purchase these products at much more reasonable prices, and they would if the quotas were eliminated.
Trade Ambassador Clayton Yeiter said that the U.S. is requesting fair play in international trade between the two nations.
Economic rationale for liberalizing these quotas in Japan is the simple one of giving Japanese consumers the opportunity and the privilege of purchasing American products should they choose to do so. No one's going to force them to buy American products. We simply believe they ought to have the privilege and the opportunity to buy them if they like. Certainly that is the argument that is made by the government of Japan and by the private sector in Japan with respect to American market opportunities for them on industrial goods in the United States. I have heard over and over again with the threat of a trade bill that America should not go protectionist and that we should keep our markets open to the goods of other nations, and I agree with that. The Americans ought to have the privilege of buying Japanese industrial products, automobiles, cameras, or whatever they may be, if the price is attractive and the quality is attractive. The same argument applies here, going the other direction.
Ambassador Yeiter said that if Japan does not respond to U.S. requests to eliminate the quotas, a protest may be filed against Japan at the 95-nation meeting next month of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade.
Ambassador Samuels, who is my deputy USTR, has alerted his counterparts in Geneva, Switzerland, the headquarters of the GATT, of the potential need for a meeting of the GATT Council in early April to take up this matter if we do not resolve it successfully by negotiations in the interim. And it would be our plan to call for a meeting of the GATT Council and ask for the initiation of formal dispute settlement procedures should we not resolve it satisfactorily by the deadline date of March 31.
In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Ceremonies marking the opening of Agriculture Week were held recently in the nation's capital. First observed in 1973, Agriculture Week is declared on the first day of spring by Congress, the President, and many state governors. The 1988 observance was coordinated by the Agricultural Council of America. Orville Freeman, president of the council, noted how National Agricultural Week can help to bring the agricultural industry together.
This all adds up to the kickoff for Ag Day and Ag Week. And occasions like this one are taking place all over the United States, in schools, in governor's offices, in mayor's offices, in celebrations, in a host of ways to focus attention on agriculture, on its importance, as Bud Porter said so well. He also said, and I would quickly underscore, that through the aegis of the Agriculture Council of America, all of agriculture, that whole vital and critical food chain, can come together on issues of major policy significance and speak effectively with one voice. We've never been able to do that, and I tried when I was Secretary of Agriculture to get all groups to come together. It's difficult to do. We have a vast and complicated interrelated agriculture, but on basic policy questions, we need to tell our story together and more effectively. They do it in Europe, they do it in Japan. We don't do it very well.
Agriculture continues to be the basis of all our prosperity. It's our biggest industry. It's our chief advantage over the countries of the world. We should take advantage of it.
The central focus of the ceremonies was a poster that is the first of a series to be produced annually for Agriculture Week. The chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Kiko de la Garza, said the painting captured the spirit of farming.
And I think that this beautiful painting, continuing the legacy, is very appropriately named, and it symbolizes what we who are involved in agriculture are all about. It's unfortunate that everyone does not yet know the contribution, less appreciated, but in our hearts we know that this is the greatest country in the world. The taproots and the foundation are those who work the land and everyone that springs from it. In my part of the country in South Texas, there is a saying that if you go on the land and you don't feel the vibration in your body and your soul, forget it. It's not going to grow for you. You're not a farmer. That's what this is all about, this day and that beautiful painting. And I thank all of you who have cooperated to make the day possible, and those of you who have come to celebrate with us.
The painting was commissioned for Agricultural Week from internationally known artist Bart Forbes. Secretary of Agriculture Richard Ling joined in a ribbon-cutting ceremony which concluded the observance.
I think I'll get in this picture myself. All right, get it ready. Cut on 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, cut. There, yay!
In Washington, I'm Deboria Janifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Global wheat production is forecast to be the third largest crop on record. Southern Hemisphere nations have indications of high yields, and global supplies of cotton and oilseeds are up. We'll examine world supply and demand estimates in a discussion with Sam Evans, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who compiles statistics on world agricultural estimates. Sam, with global wheat production up, what are the prospects for world wheat trade?
Well, there are several developments affecting world wheat trade this season. First and foremost, wheat is a real buyer's market. By any historical standard, wheat prices are low, and these low prices are resulting not only from large production, but from the Export Enhancement Program for United States wheat and from the export subsidies offered by other wheat exporting nations. As a result, wheat trade is up. Now, at the same time, we have some smaller crops in some of the principal importing countries, namely the Soviet Union and China. And these two countries are importing about 9 million more tons in 1987 than they did in 1986, and they account for most of the increase in world wheat trade. Now, at the same time, production is up in some countries. In the countries that compete with the United States, Australia and Canada, production is down. So the United States is the primary beneficiary of this increase in world wheat trade, and we're increasing our wheat exports about 15 million tons over the 1986-87 season.
What's the expected impact of the Southern Hemisphere nations' productions on coarse grains?
Well, this is the time of year when everyone looks at production in the Southern Hemisphere. Three countries that are being closely watched are South Africa, Brazil, and Argentina. Now, earlier in the season, it was thought that South Africa could have a larger crop than they had for the 1986-87 season, by 15% or so. But now it looks like they may do well just to match last season's output. And some of the South American countries, soybean prices have been high relative to corn, so they have switched some land out of corn into soybeans. As a result, production in Brazil could be down 10 to 15%, and Argentina could about match last year's production, but even so, they would be well below the production of a couple of years ago.
What's the forecast for exports of U.S. feed grains?
Our U.S. feed grain exports are running pretty strong at this time. For the 87 season, they could be about 10% up over 1986, and could be about 40% above what they were in 1985. Two reasons for this. One is U.S. Feed grain prices are very competitive under the new Farm Bill, and at the same time, production in some of the foreign exporting countries, and South Africa, Thailand, and Argentina, is lower than it was a couple of years ago. And most of our increase in our exports will be to our biggest customer, Japan, also to Korea, Spain, and a couple of countries in Eastern Europe.
Sam Evans and World Supply and Demand. In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Global supplies of cotton and oil seeds are higher. We'll examine world supply and demand estimates in a discussion with Sam Evans, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Sam, what's the outlook for competition to U.S. soybean exports?
U.S. soybeans compete mainly with production from South America, Brazil, and Argentina. In the last 2 or 3 years, soybean prices have been running high relative to feed grain prices. As a result, those producers in South America have been switching some land from corn to soybeans. And the USDA is estimating that South American soybean production for 1988 could be 10 to 12% above what it was last year, and more than 30% above what it was just 2 years ago. Now, U.S. soybean exports have been running fairly strong so far this season, but as the South American production is marketed this spring and summer, we'll see our soybean exports tail off somewhat. And in contrast to wheat and feed grains, where we've seen enormous increases in U.S. exports, exports of soybeans have not grown much under the new Farm Bill. And unless there's a restoration of a normal soybean to corn price ratio, the outlook is for U.S. soybeans to increase very little or not at all over the next 2 or 3 years.
What are the major factors influencing the outlook for U.S. soybean prices?
Soybean prices have responded over the last couple of years to U.S. stocks of soybeans being reduced considerably. At the end of 87, 88, we could have our stocks down to around 300 million bushels. And just a couple of years ago, they were up around 550 million bushels. And at the same time, the Farm Bill has not lowered the loan rate of soybeans nearly as much as it did for feed grains and cotton and some other crops. So soybean prices have stayed fairly high. And for the 87 season, they could average somewhere around $5.50 to $5.60 a bushel. This would be about 75 cents a bushel above the average for the 86 crop.
Let's discuss world cotton. What's the supply-demand outlook for that?
World cotton stocks have been drawn down considerably over the last couple of years. At the end of this season, they could be under 30 million bales. And just 2 years ago, they were about 45 million bales. This has resulted from a fairly large increase in cotton consumption over the last 2 years and some reduction in production in the United States and a few other countries. Now, during the 87-88 season, we've seen production estimates for the U.S., China, and Pakistan increase. As a result, world cotton prices have dropped throughout the season. They've dropped about 20 cents a pound from their season high. And world cotton trade, although it's very high by historical standards, is a little bit below the record that was set for the 1986 season.
Sam Evans and World Supply and Demand. In Washington, Vic Powell reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
January storms improved the water supply outlook in sections of the West, but some states could experience shortages because of low snowpack and precipitation conditions. A recent report indicates that record low precipitation in parts of the West has reduced an already low water supply. With us today to focus on the current water supply situation in the West is Bill Fecky with USDA's Soil Conservation Service. Bill, what factors are now contributing to the current forecast for water supply shortages in the West?
Well, the biggest factor, Debbie, see is the extremely low precipitation that we had in February in most of the West. Some areas of the West are as low as 5% of normal, and these areas would be the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevadas in California and western Utah. The states of Nevada, California, Utah, Washington, and Oregon are all extremely low at this time of the year.
Now, how much do these areas depend on snowpack for their water supply?
Well, as much as 80% of the water supply in the West comes from snowmelt.
Do you see the situation turning around in the coming weeks?
It's extremely doubtful. As of April 1st, we usually have upwards of 90% of the snowpack, so things don't look very good for a good snowpack season at this time. The areas are going to have to rely on spring or summer rainfall to do their irrigation work.
Which brings me to my next question. If the situation doesn't improve, what steps can these areas take to increase their supply of water?
Well, there's not much they can do to increase their water supply. Some things that they can do, though, is not plant as many crops as they have in the past, or plant crops that use low amounts of water. One thing that some of the irrigators do is, since some of the snowpack is melting early this year, is run some of the water onto the fields early, and they will have some water stored in the ground to grow their crops early. But some of the junior right irrigators may not get any water at all this year.
Bill, we talk about the Soil Conservation Service and procedures used to monitor water supply, specifically SNOTEL. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, SNOTEL is an automatic data collection system in the West where we have 590 remote sites where we collect this information. What we actually do is weigh the snowpack as the snow falls, and this indicates to us how much water content the snow has. We have 2 downlinks in Ogden, Utah, and Boise, Idaho, and all the information is transferred to our central computer in Portland, Oregon. And we can update snowstorms as much as hourly, if necessary, to tell us how much snow is coming down.
You mentioned that updating part of the system. Can a system like this be used to alert farmers beforehand of a possible water shortage?
Yes, in fact, we had indications this year, as early as the first report in January, that the season looked like we may have extremely low snowpack. And as the season has gone on, except for a little period in February or in January when the snow did increase some, it has been an extremely bad year for snowpack.
Bill Fecky with USDA's Soil Conservation Service. In Washington, I'm Deborah Jonifer reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.